All right, join me on page 358 in your science textbook. Follow along. What is weathering? Earth's surface is constantly changing. One way that Earth's surface is transformed or broken down is through weathering. Weathering is the gradual breakdown of rock into smaller pieces by natural processes such as precipitation, wind, plant growth, and temperature change. Page 359, Types of Weathering. When a concrete sidewalk is first poured, it looks smooth and fresh. Over time, the sidewalk starts to chip, crack, and become rough. If a tree is growing nearby, the sidewalk may begin to lift as the tree's roots grow underneath it. The same natural processes that slowly break apart a sidewalk also act to break apart rock. Rock can undergo two kinds of weathering, physical and chemical. Physical weathering breaks rock apart into smaller and smaller pieces that retain the characteristics of the original rock. Physical weathering is also known as mechanical weathering. One way that physical weathering happens is through the freezing and thawing of water. When water freezes, it expands. Water works its way into cracks in rock. On a cold day, the water freezes and expands, pushing the rock apart and making it crack and break. After many freeze-thaw cycles, the rock is broken into pieces. Root pressure from plants can also crack rocks. So that's what the picture on your computer screen is showing. The rock has a little crack, some water goes into that crack. At night, maybe that water freezes, which expands, pushing the rock apart. And then next time it rains, more water seeps in because the crack's a little bigger. It freezes, pushes the rock further apart, and then over time you start to see that rock completely break apart. Okay, continuing in your text. Another kind of physical weathering takes place when tiny rock fragments carried by wind and water wear down landforms through a process called abrasion. Abrasion occurs when sand, stones, and pebbles move and scrape across Earth's surface, acting like sandpaper to pit and polish the surface. A different type of weathering is chemical weathering. Unlike physical weathering, chemical weathering changes the composition of the rock. The new minerals have properties different from those of the original rock. Chemical weathering happens when minerals in rock interact with chemicals found in water and air. These chemicals cause rocks and minerals to break down. For example, the acids in rain eat away limestone. Both physical weathering and chemical weathering tend to round off corners, smoothing away a rock's sharp edges. Most landscapes are a product of both types of weathering. A cliff may break apart as a result of physical weathering at the same time as it is altered by chemical weathering. Okay, turning the page 360. How is Earth's surface reshaped? Through the process of weathering, rock is broken into smaller pieces. These pieces are then carried away by wind and water to be deposited in new places. So Earth's surface is reshaped. Erosion is the wearing away of Earth's surface by the breakdown and transportation of rock and soil. Water, wind, gravity, and ice loosen and carry away bits of rock. Deposition is the process by which the eroded soil and rock are put down in new places, reshaping the landscape. Water is the primary agent in shaping the landscape in both California and the rest of the world. After falling on the land as precipitation, water flows downhill because of the pull of gravity. The flowing water erodes the landscape by washing away sand and soil, moving boulders, and cutting through rock. It then deposits these materials in new places. One of the most important causes of change to Earth's surface is the flowing water in stream and rivers. Over millions of years, these moving waters can carve canyons through solid rock. Okay, continuing on page 361. Weathered rock may also be carried away by blowing wind. This is especially true in the desert, where there is little vegetation to hold down the sand particles and prevent wind erosion. The wind blows the smallest particles of sand across the surface of the desert and deposits them, forming mounds called sand dunes. The wind can pile sand into dunes hundreds of meters high. Away from the desert, erosion is usually slowed by the presence of plants and trees. The roots that have grown into the ground help hold soil particles in place. However, large, open spaces such as barren farmland are exposed to erosion by wind and water. And this was one of the main problems during the Dust Bowl, is those wide open fields were exposed to erosion, and the farmers didn't use some of the techniques we have today to help prevent erosion. Okay, continuing in your text. Weathered rock carried away by the wind is eventually deposited. Most of the rock particles, called sediment, are deposited in river floodplains, desert basins, swamps, dunes, and oceans. Over a long period of time, layers of sediment may build up and be pressed together by the layers above them. With heat and time, the sediment eventually changes back into rock again. All right, thanks for following along, and go ahead and continue on your science lesson.